One might argue that Izora should have known better than to hand her whole heart to a king. But then again, if Aldrich had been even a shade less convincing, the night he swore before the old gods that she was his and his alone, she would never have handed it over in the first place. So really, if one followed the thread all the way to its end, everything that came after was his fault, every last ruinous piece of it. Which was a peculiar sort of comfort to a woman who had spent her whole life priding herself on being nobody's fool. Waisora Vane was by the reckoning of the entire Ashbel court, the steadiest head in 3 provinces. She did not swoon. She did not simper, as the king's own huntress, and the finest tracker the northern packs had produced in a generation. She had faced down winter wolves and border raiders without so much as a hitch in her breathing. So it was a source of some private astonishment that the one creature alive capable of undoing her was a man in a crown who smiled at her as though she were the only fixed point in a spinning room. Tonight the great hall of Asheville had been dressed for an announcement. 1,000 candles climbed the black stone walls, and the banners of every allied pack hung heavy from the rafters, and the whole of the court had crushed itself shoulder to shoulder along the length of the floor, because word had gone round that the king meant at last to name his queen. Isara stood near the foot of the dais in deep forest green, the color he'd once told her he loved best against her skin, and she let herself believe, foolishly, fatally, that she knew exactly how the night would end. She had reason to believe it. 3 weeks passed on the cold rampart above the east gate. Aldrich had taken both her hands in his and pressed his brow to hers, and said the words, "A woman does not misremember. When the court is gathered, I will name you before all of them. No more shadows, no more waiting." And she had believed him, because in 11 years of knowing the man she had never once caught him in a lie. That, she would think later, was the cruelest part. He had never needed to lie, he had simply let her build the whole cathedral of her hope, and never told her the ground beneath it was already sold. The horns sounded. The great doors opened, and Aldrich came down the aisle of his own hall like a blade, drawn slow from a sheath, broad through the shoulder, unhurried, that dark gold hair catching the candlelight, the crown sitting on him as though it had grown there. Izora's wolf rose under her skin, the way it always did when he entered a room, a warmth, a leaning toward. She had to school her face to stillness. Soon, she told herself, soon she would not have to hide it. But he did not walk to her. He walked past her, and it was only then, with her heart still climbing toward a word he would never say, that Isora understood there was a second figure at the far edge of the dais, one she had been too dazzled to mark. A woman in mourning gray so fine, it had gone nearly silver, her dark hair unbound in the old widow's fashion, her chin lifted, her eyes downcast in a grief so tastefully arranged it might have been painted. Verena, the widow of General Corwin, who had fallen not 4 months past, holding the Redmore line so the rest of them could live. The whole court knew her sorrow. The whole court had wept for it. The whole court, it seemed, had known what was coming tonight. Everyone but Isora, my people, Aldrich said, and his voice filled the hall the way it always did, easy and certain, a man who had never once had to raise it to be obeyed. We have bled this year, we have buried our best. His gaze went, grave and gentle, to the woman in gray. General Corwin gave his life for this crown. I can never repay that debt, but I can honor it. Tonight I take his widow, the Lady Verena, to be my queen, that his name shall sit beside mine, and the packs he died to unite shall be bound in my own house. The hall erupted, approval, astonishment, a roar of it. And Isora stood in the middle of that roar, perfectly still, while the floor of her life quietly dropped away. He had not looked at her, not once. Not when he passed her, not when he spoke, not now as Verena's silver-gray hand slid into his and the court surged forward to bless the match. He would not look at her, and somewhere far beneath the ringing in her ears, Isaura understood that this was not carelessness. It was mercy of the worst kind, the mercy of a man who knew precisely what he was doing to her and could not bear to watch it land. She should have felt the tears. She felt nothing. She felt the cold, clean nothing of a hunter who has heard the ice crack under her own weight and knows. There is no use screaming. 11 years, the rampart, no more shadows. And she had come tonight. She had come to this hall, of all places, carrying a thing she had told no living soul. Her hand moved without her leave. It settled, flat and quiet, low against her own belly, where, 6 days ago, a gray-eyed healer in the lower town had pressed 2 fingers and gone very still, and then, wondering, told her there were 2 heartbeats under her hand. 2. Not 1. She had come tonight to give the king a secret that would have changed his whole face. She looked at him, laughing softly at something. The widow murmured, and she took her hand away. No, she thought. Not this, not to you. And Isora Vane, who did not swoon, and did not simper, and had never in her life been anyone's fool, turned her back on the king of Ashfell in the middle of his own triumph, and walked, unhurried and unbroken, toward the doors, while behind her, unseen, the widow in grey lifted her downcast eyes at last, and watched her go, and smiled. Isora did not remember the walk home. She remembered the cold of the outer stair, and the way the guards at the gate would not meet her eyes, which told her the whole palace already knew and had known before she did. She remembered reaching her own small quarters in the huntsman's wing and closing the door and standing in the dark with her back against it for a long time, breathing, while both hands cupped low over the secret no one could see. 2 heartbeats. His. Whether he deserved them or not. Tell me it isn't true. Nima was already there. Of course she was, curled and furious in the window seat, her round face blotched from crying on Isara's behalf, which was so exactly like her that it nearly undid the composure Isara had carried all the way up the stair. Nima had been her friend since they were both fosterlings too small to lift a bow, and she loved Isora with the ferocious, tactless loyalty of someone who had never learned to guard her own heart, and so guarded her friends twice as hard. Tell me the whole court has it wrong. Tell me he did not stand up in front of the gods. And he did, Isora said. Nima's mouth shut. Then it opened again. The widow. That silken sorrow creature Isora. The general's barely 4 months in his grave. 4 months. And she's mourned her way straight into the king's own bed. And now she's to be. She stopped, because Isora had crossed to the trunk at the foot of her bed and thrown it open and begun, with the flat efficiency of a soldier breaking camp, to pack. What are you doing? Leaving. Tonight, you can't just. Nima came off the window seat. You're the king's huntress. You have a post. You have a name. You have Isara. Walking away in the dark like a thief only makes it look as though you've done something wrong. I know. Isara folded a spare shirt with hands that had, mercifully, stopped shaking somewhere on the stair. That is exactly what I am counting on. She had done the arithmetic already. She had done it standing in the hall while the court cheered, because doing arithmetic was the only thing that had kept her upright. A cast-off huntress was a sad story, and a 9 days' gossip, and nothing more. But a cast-off huntress carrying the king's blood, carrying God's, too, was not a sad story. She was a claim. She was a knife pointed at the belly of the widow's whole future. Verena had married a crown tonight, and the only thing on this earth that could unseat a new queen was an older love with the king's own children in her arms. If that woman ever learned what Isora carried, the babes would not live to be born. Isora had hunted long enough to know how the powerful removed inconveniences, quietly, in the dark, with men who wrapped their faces and left no story behind them but a hunting accident, a fever, a woman who simply wandered off one night and was never found. She would not give them the chance. She would vanish so completely and so believably that no one would think to wonder whether there had been anything worth chasing. Grief was the perfect disguise. The whole court would nod and say the huntress could not bear the sight of him, and never looked twice at the truth walking out the gate under their noses. "No one can know," she said. "Do you understand me, Nima? Not the healer, not the guard, not your own sweetheart. When he's warm and you're feeling soft. No one, as far as this court will ever know. I left because my pride couldn't stand the shame. Let them believe it." Let her believe it. It's the only thing that keeps me breathing. She did not say keeps them breathing. She could not yet say it aloud. Nima's eyes had gone wide and wet. "Keeps you, Isora. You're frightening me. What aren't you telling me?" And Isora almost did. The word was right there, warm and enormous and aching to be shared. She looked at her oldest friend's open, streaming face and she thought, if I say it, I make her a target too. So she did the hardest thing she had done all night, harder than turning her back on the king, and she lied to the one person in the world who had never once lied to her. "Nothing," she said gently. "I'm only tired. Go home, be seen going home. And if anyone asks, you don't know which road I took." Nima wavered. Then she flung her arms round Isora's neck and held on hard, and Isora let herself be held for exactly 3 breaths, no more, because more than that and she would not be able to leave at all. "You come back," Nima whispered fiercely into her hair. "You come back to me. Do you hear?" "I hear you," Isora said, and did not promise, because she'd had enough of promises for one lifetime. She was cinching the last strap of her pack when the bell above the outer gate began to ring, not the slow toll of the watch change. Fast, urgent, the ring that meant open the gate. Someone comes with the king's own authority. Nima's head came up. Isora went very still, one hand frozen on the buckle, and listened. And under the clamor of the bell she caught it, the thing that turned her blood to river ice. Hoofbeats in the yard below, several, reined in hard. And a voice she did not know, giving an order, she could not hear, low and clipped and certain. The voice of a man used to being obeyed. She crossed to the window and looked down. 6 riders in the yard, cloaked, faces shadowed, and every last one of them looking up at the huntsman's wing, at her window, as though they had been told precisely which one it was. Someone already knew. There was a way out of the huntsman's wing that no one had used in 40 years, because no one but the huntress had reason to know the old kennel run still connected to the culvert beneath the east wall. Isora had found it as a girl, tracking a lost hound. She blessed that hound now, and that girl, as she dropped from the culvert mouth into the frozen ditch beyond the walls, with her pack on her back and her heart going like a war drum. And behind her, muffled by stone, the sound of boots on the stair she had left only moments before. She did not run for the North Road. The North Road was hers, her country, the way any tracker, worth her salt, would go to ground, which was exactly why they would look for her there. Instead, she went south and downhill, into the tangle of the lower town where the streets narrowed and stank and doubled back on themselves, because a hunter knows that the best place to lose a hunter is a place with too many scents. She kept to the gutters. She breathed through her mouth. And when at last she pressed herself into the black slot between a tannery and a dead chapel to listen, she heard no pursuit at all, only her own blood and the drip of ice, and she let herself believe for one whole minute that she had made it. "You track like your father," said a voice out of the dark beside her. "He always went downhill too." Isora's knife was out and at the speaker's throat before the last word landed. A big man. Older, gray coming into a dark beard, a long plain coat, both empty hands raised and open and unhurried, and, she noted it even in her terror, no fear in him at all. He looked at the blade under his jaw the way another man might look at a fly. "My father is 11 years dead," she said. "Say his name. Halden Vane, warden of the Thornwood, the old warden's line, before Aldrich's father broke it and scattered you." The man's mouth twitched under the beard. "He carried a hunting knife with a stag's horn grip, just like the one you've got at my throat. And he taught his daughter to go downhill and never north when she was scared, because north is where the frightened always run. You've proved him right within the hour. Her hand did not waver, but something behind her ribs did. No one living was supposed to know that name. Her father had died a disgraced man, his wardenship stripped, his lands taken into the crown. Taken by the very house Isora had spent 11 years serving, a fact she had swallowed so many times it no longer had a taste. Who are you? Torin, I served your father, and his father. He tilted his head a fraction, careful of the edge, and I have been waiting 3 days at that chapel for you to have the good sense to run. Though I'll confess I expected it to take a cast-off woman, rather longer to see what was coming. You saw it in one night, that's Halden's blood. Those riders in the yard are the new queen's men, not the king's. And you may want to sit down for the next part, Huntress, because you've got it half wrong. Torin very slowly reached up and closed one weathered hand around her wrist. Not to force the knife away, only to steady it, and he looked at her with something that was almost pity and almost pride. You think Aldrich threw you over for a grieving widow? You think a man lost his head over a pretty sorrow? He shook his head. The king didn't choose that woman, girl. That woman chose the king. And she has been 3 years and a dead general in the making of it. The knife dipped, at last, half an inch. Then why? Isora said, and hated how young her own voice sounded. Did he do it? He gave me his word. On the east rampart, 3 weeks passed. He does not lie. In 11 years, he never once. In 11 years, Torin said, not unkindly. Did you ever once tell him what your name used to be? What house he was truly betting? No. We all keep the door. We're most afraid of shut. His just happened to be bigger than yours. He let that settle. Aldrich did not wake one morning and stop loving you. Girl, he was moved. Piece by piece, over 3 years, by a woman patient enough to marry a war hero, mourn him beautifully, and use the corpse as her ladder. A grieving widow the whole court pities, cannot be refused. That was the trap. The king walked into it with his eyes open and his hands tied, and I would wager my life he hated every step. The knife had drifted all the way down, now forgotten at her side. Then why? Isara whispered. Did he not warn me? That, Torin said. You'll have to ask him. When you're ready, when it cost him something to answer. Somewhere back up the hill, faint and cold, the gate bell began to ring a second time, and both of them turned their heads toward it. They've found the culvert, Isora said. They've found the culvert. He did not sound worried. That, more than anything, was what made her listen. Because, he went on, lower now, the widow has something of the king's, same as you do. His gray eyes dropped, just once, deliberate, to the place where Isora's free hand had risen without her leave, to cover her own belly, and rose again to her face. Isora felt the cold go all the way through her. I know. I've known since I watched you turn side on. To shield yourself in that ditch, a hunter guards what she's carrying. The difference, Huntress, is that whatever the widow claims to carry is a lie. She'll need a true one to cover. And yours is the single thing in this whole kingdom that can burn her scheme to ash. He stepped back, out of reach of the blade, and held out his open, empty hand. So, you can run south and hide in a ditch until her men find you cold, come spring, or you can take my hand and let a dead warden's man teach his warden's daughter how to win. Choose quickly. The bell won't ring a third time before they're in the streets. The Thornwood did not appear on any map the king's cartographers had ever drawn, which was precisely why it had survived. They rode for 2 nights, sleeping cold and lightless through the days, and on the third dawn Torin led her off the game trail and straight at a wall of bramble and gray stone that Isora's eyes slid over twice before she understood she was looking at a gate. Then the bramble moved, drawn back on a hidden hinge by hands she could not see, and the old warden folk came out of the mist to look at the daughter of Halden Vane. There were more of them than she would have dreamed. 40 households, Torin told her. Maybe 50. The scattered remnant of the wardens Aldrich's father had broken 20 years past when he'd swallowed the thornwood into the crown and hanged its lords for the crime of holding land a king wanted. They had not died. They had gone into the deep wood and waited, keeping the old ways and the old grievance banked like a coal, and they had raised their children on one story above all others. That Warden Halden's line was not ended, that a girl had been carried out in the dark and that one day she would come home. Isora had spent 11 years believing she was the last of nothing. To stand in that misted yard and watch grown men she had never met lower their eyes and press their fists to their hearts undid something in her that the king's whole hall had failed to break. "You knew," she said to Torin. "All these years you could have come for me. You were the king's huntress, warm and fed and in love," he said. "You'd have named us traitors and meant it. A door has to be opened from the inside, girl. Yours only opened last night. And he's the one who opened it." He did not say it cruelly. That was the trouble with Torin. He never said anything cruelly, which left you no way to argue. The holdfast itself was a living thing, half fortress and half warren, grown into the roots of the wood so thoroughly that from 10 paces off, it looked like nothing but hillside and thorn. They fed her that first night at a long common table, where 40 faces watched her eat and pretended not to, and an old woman pressed a wooden token into her palm, carved with the running stag of her father's house, worn smooth by 20 years of somebody's thumb. "We kept it for you," the woman said simply, and would not take it back. Isora, who had learned young never to weep where anyone could see, had to go out into the cold to do it. She stood a long while under the black trees, with the token biting into her fist, and understood that she had spent 11 years being useful to a crown that had murdered her name, and that these people had spent the same 11 years keeping that name alive for nothing but love of a man long dead. It was almost more than the betrayal. Grief she knew how to carry. This she did not. They gave her a room in the old holdfast, and a healer named Mela, a broad, unhurried woman with river-gray eyes and hands that had caught half the children in the wood, came the first night to sit with her. Mela said nothing about the court, nothing about the king. She only laid 2 warm fingers low against Isora's belly the way the healer in the lower town had done, and went still, and then looked up with a slow wonder that was almost frightening. "2," Mela murmured. "You know already." "Good." Her weathered face creased. "Does he?" "No." Isara's voice came out flat and final. "And he never will." Mela studied her a long moment. "Secrets that size don't keep on their own, child. They need feeding, and they need guarding, and one day they always ask to be let out." She patted Isora's hand and rose. "When yours does, and it will see that you're the one who opens the door, not her." For the better part of 3 weeks, Isora let the wood remake her. She woke before the others and ran the trap lines and remembered, muscle by muscle, that she was a hunter before she had ever been a heartbreak. She let Torin drill her in the things her father had never lived to teach. The old warden hand signs, the names of the households, the map of every debt and grudge that Aldrich's house had left unpaid across the north. She began, without quite deciding to plan, and for the first time since the candlelit hall, she felt the cold nothing in her chest warm into something with an edge on it. Then, on a gray afternoon, a rider came in from the lower town, half dead in the saddle, and the news he carried turned the whole holdfast to stone. Queen Verena had proclaimed to the court that she was carrying the king's child. The heir of Asheville, the general's honor, and the king's blood joined in one womb, a marvel, a blessing on the whole realm, and the bells had rung in the capital for 3 days. Isora stood in the yard with the news going through her like a blade drawn slow, and she understood, all at once, exactly how much time she did not have. A false heir in the queen's belly made a true heir in Isora's, a death warrant with 2 names on it. The moment Verena needed a child to show the court, she would need Isara's never to be born. That's the lie. Torin, beside her, said nothing. He didn't have to. That's the lie you meant. She isn't carrying anything at all. No, said Torin. But in 6 months' time she'll need to be holding a living child, or the whole realm will know it. And there's only one cradle in this kingdom, with the king's true blood in it. He looked at her, grim. Yours. After that, Isora stopped grieving and started hunting. She did it the only way she knew, patiently, from the edges, following scent and sign. Torin had men in the lower town, and one, he would only say, higher up than you'd credit, and through them the pieces came north to the Thornwood a few at a time, and Isora laid them out on the holdfast table night after night and taught herself the shape of the thing that had eaten her life. Verena had not stumbled into the king's path. She had been laid across it. 3 years back she'd come to court a minor lord's plain daughter and married the realm's greatest war hero, General Corwin, a match everyone had called a step above her station. Corwin had adored her. Corwin had also, in the last year of his life, begun quietly writing to the king's own council about supply trains that never arrived at the Redmoor line, about coin marked for his soldiers that bled away somewhere between the treasury and the front. He had been getting close to a name. And then Corwin had died at Redmoor, heroically, gloriously, holding a line that Isora noticed when she finally got the muster rolls. He should never have been ordered to hold with the numbers he'd been given. She fed him to that battle, Isara said softly, the candle guttering. To make herself a widow, the court would pity, and to bury whatever he was about to prove. That's a hanging thought to say aloud. Mela murmured from the corner, with no rope proof to back it. Then I'll get the proof. Isara did not look up from the rolls. It'll be in the treasury ledgers, or in Corwin's own letters, and one of the two is still in the capital. There was more, and the more was worse. The coin that had bled away from Corwin's soldiers had not simply vanished into a thief's purse, it had gone somewhere, and the somewhere left a scent even 3 years cold. Isora followed it across a dozen smudged pages the way she'd follow a blood trail through snow, and it led south, always south, to the Dunreach, the salt and iron realm across the border that had wanted a foothold in Ashfell for 100 years and never found the door. Now, it seemed, someone had sold them one. A queen with a foreign paymaster and a false child in her belly was no longer merely a woman who had broken Isora's heart. She was a knife at the throat of the whole realm, and the king she had married was sleeping beside it. She did not get the chance to plan the how of it, because 2 nights later the how came to them. She smelled the strangers before the dogs, did oiled steel and horse, and a cold southern soap the woodfolk never used, and she was already moving through the dark holdfast, bare feet silent, when the first of them came over the east palisade. Not bandits. Bandits did not move in a spread line, did not clear a wall without a word, did not carry the short blades made for close work in the dark. Verena's men, 6, then 8, hunting through the households for one particular face. What they had not reckoned on was a warden's daughter who had run these paths in her sleep for 3 weeks and hunted her whole life. Isora did not sound the alarm. She took them down from the shadows, the way she'd have turned a wolf pack off a herd, quiet, and from behind, and one by one, because the first man she let slip away would be the man who carried word of her back to the capital. When Torin's people finally spilled into the yard with torches, it was mostly finished, and Isora was crouched over the last of them, with her father's staghorn knife at his throat, breathing hard, the fight still humming in her hands. "Who sent you?" she said. "Say it and I let you keep your throat." He was young and frightened, and far from home, and he told her because men always did once. They understood she meant it. A queen's man, yes. But not by the queen's own order, by her spy masters. A name the boy gave up in a whisper that made even Torin go still, and they had not been sent to kill a warden's daughter they'd never heard of. They'd been sent to find and bring back a woman named Isora Vaughn, the king's cast-off huntress, alive, because someone at court had begun to suspect there was a reason the huntress had run, and wanted her opened up to find out what it was. Alive, not dead. That single word changed everything, and Isaura crouched there in the trampled dark and felt the ground shift under her feet a second time. Farina did not merely want her gone. Farina wanted to know her secret first. "They know I'm carrying something," she breathed. "They don't know what?" "Not yet." "Then we've a little time," Torn said. "And not 1 hour more than a little." He crouched beside her, his face hard in the torchlight. "You wanted a way into the capital, girl. Here it is," walking up to our gate with the answer in his mouth. "There's a treasury clerk this boy answers to, a man who can be reached and turned and made to hand up the ledgers that hang the queen." He met her eyes. "But it's a door. Only one person in this wood can walk through. Someone the court knows, someone they'd never expect to see come strolling back into the lion's mouth." Isaura wiped her father's knife clean on the dead grass and stood. And for the first time in a month, there was something almost like a smile on her mouth, and there was nothing warm in it at all. "Then I'd best go home," she said. She went back to the capital as no one at all, a laundress in a carrier's cart, hooded, plain, her scent smothered under lye and other people's linen, so thoroughly that not even her own wolf could have found her in it. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever done, and she did it with the flat calm of a woman who had already survived the worst night of her life, and found to her surprise that she was still standing. The plan was clean. Reach Torrens turned clerk in the Treasury Archive at the dead hour, take the 2 ledgers that named where Corwin's coin had truly gone, and be back in the carrier's cart before the bells rang matins. In and out, a hunter's raid. No blood, if she could help it. She had walked these corridors for 11 years. She knew which flagstones spoke and which stayed silent. What the plan had not accounted for was that the king could not sleep either. She had the ledgers in her hands, rolled and bound, and pressed to her chest, and she had made it as far as the old scriptorium colonnade when she heard the footsteps, one man, unhurried, coming her way through the dark with no torch, as though he too preferred not to be seen. She melted into the black slot of a doorway and went still as stone. He would pass. They always passed. He stopped. "I know that step," said Aldrich quietly to the darkness. "I have listened for it for 2 months. I would know it in my grave." A long, terrible silence. Isaura. She could have run. She was faster than him, and the night was hers. But her wolf, the traitor, would not move. It had leaned toward him the instant he spoke, the way it always had, the bond she'd been strangling since the wedding flaring hot and hungry in her chest. And by the time she had wrestled it down, he had stepped into the doorway's mouth, and she could see him, and he could see her, and it was already too late. Gods, he looked wrecked. The man who wore a crown as though it had grown there, stood hollow-eyed and unshaven, and when he looked at her, his whole face came apart with a want so naked it hurt to witness. "You're real," he breathed. "They said you'd run north. I've had riders on every north road for—" He stopped, his eyes dropped to the bundle crushed against her chest, and something in a lifetime of court instinct sharpened behind them. "What are you carrying?" Her blood went to ice. "Nothing that's yours anymore," she said. "None of it is yours anymore. You saw to that." The words landed on him like blows, and she watched him take every one. "I know what it looked like," he said, low and ragged. "I know what I did, but you don't know what I was." He took a step, and she took one back, and he froze at once, both hands rising open, exactly the way Torrin had in the ditch, and the echo of it nearly broke her. "Sora, please." On the rampart, I meant every word. "I have to tell you what happened. I have to make you—" "Make me what?" The word tore out of her before she could stop it, and there it was, all the iron she'd forged since the wedding finally cracking. Just a hairline. Just enough. Understand. "I understood perfectly, Your Grace. From the floor of your own hall, you looked through me like I was a window. Do you know I counted? 11 years, and you could not spend one glance." She hated the heat behind her eyes. She hated more that her wolf had not stopped straining toward him, that the bond between them was singing so loud she could barely think over it, that even now, ledgers of his ruin pressed to her chest. Some traitor part of her wanted nothing in the world so much as to close the little dark distance and press her face to his throat and be told it had all been a mistake. He must have felt it too. The bond ran both ways. It always had, because his own breath had gone shallow and his hand had lifted halfway toward her face before he caught it. "I couldn't look at you," he said, so quietly she nearly missed it. "If I had looked at you, I would not have been able to do it, and if I had not done it, you would be dead now. Both of you." His jaw worked. "I have spent every day since learning exactly how far she can reach, Isara, and it is further than you know. Casting you off, in front of the whole court, was the only lie big enough to make her believe I did not care whether you lived. It was the cruelest thing I have ever done, and it is the only reason you are standing here, breathing." For one unbearable heartbeat, she almost believed him. That was the danger of Aldrich. He had always been able to make the maddest thing sound like the only sane one, and the bond wanted so badly to be soothed. She made herself look down at the ledgers instead, at the proof of what his queen truly was, and she made herself remember that a clever lie sounds exactly like a hard truth, right up until it costs you everything. "You had 2 months, and every North Road to say that," she said, and her voice did not shake, which she counted the greatest victory of her life. "You chose the corridors in the dark instead. That tells me all I need." She backed toward the far arch, the ledgers and the secret both hidden against her heart. "Good night, Your Grace." "Isara." And then his head snapped sideways, wolf-quick, toward the scriptorium's far end, where a floorboard had just breathed under a weight that was not hers and not his. His hand went to his belt. "We're not alone," he said very softly, all the grief gone hard out of his voice. "Someone's been listening to every word." For one breath, they stood frozen together in the dark, king and huntress, the old quarrel between them forgotten, in the deeper language of two predators who have both heard the same wrong sound. Then the eavesdropper broke and ran, and they moved as one, the way they always had on 100 old hunts, before there was ever a crown between them. Aldrich wide to cut the angle, Isara low and fast down the colonnade. The runner was good. He knew the scriptorium, which told her something. He vaulted the reading rail and cut for the servant's stair, and he would have made it, except that, at the last instant, he spun and threw, and Isora saw the short blade leave his hand and saw exactly where it was going, which was not at her. It was going at the king's throat. She did not decide to move. 11 years of instinct decided for her. She hit Aldrich across the body, and they went down together in a tangle as the blade sparked off the stone where his head had been, and for one suspended moment, she was full length against him in the dark, his heart slamming under her palm. His breath in her hair, and the bond she had spent every night since the wedding strangling tore wide open between them like a door blown off its hinges. It flooded her. All of him, at once, with nowhere to hide. Not triumph, not scheming, not the cold cleverness she'd braced for. Terror. Terror for her, white and total. The animal panic of a man who had just watched a blade fly at the one thing left in the world he could not bear to lose, and under the terror, laid bare and defenseless, a grief and a wanting so vast and so plainly, stupidly sincere that it stopped her breath. There was no lie in him. She was pressed against the truth of him, and there was no lie anywhere in it. And then, for the space of a single heartbeat, the bond snagged on something else, some deeper, doubled, warmth, low, in her, that was not hers and not his, a note underneath the note. And she felt his wolf pause over it, puzzled, reaching, as though it had caught the edge of a scent it half knew and could not name. Her whole body went rigid with a new and different fear. If he held her one breath longer, He would have it. He would know. Isora, he gasped, and his hand had come up to cradle the back of her head, and for half a heartbeat, neither of them was anything but the two people they'd been on the rampart. She tore herself back before the wolf in him could finish the thought, and the loss of his warmth was a physical wrench, and she hated her own body for grieving it. Then, boots sounded on the far stair, more of them, and the moment shattered. Aldrich was on his feet with his own blade out, putting his body between her and the sound. Every inch the alpha now. "Go!" he said, low and fierce. "Whatever you came for, go, before the whole watch is on this floor. Go. And, gods, Isora, be careful. She has eyes I haven't found yet." His voice cracked. "Just live. However much you hate me, do that one thing. Live." She went. She was over the reading rail and into the black slot of the servants' passage, before the watch reached the colonnade, and she did not look back because if she looked back she would not go at all. She did not breathe properly until the carrier's cart was 2 leagues north of the walls, and the ledgers were safe under the false floor, and the dawn was coming up gray over the frost. Only then, jolting in the dark under a pile of other people's linen, did she let herself take the assassin's blade out of her coat. She'd caught it up off the floor without thinking, a hunter's habit, and turn it over in the thin light. Dunreach steel. She'd expected that. Southern make, the cold salt iron of the border realm, exactly the hand she'd been tracking through the ledgers. What she had not expected was the mark scratched into the ricasso, small and private, the sort of owner's mark a careful man cuts, so his blade is not confused with another's in the dark. She knew that mark. She had seen it 100 times in 3 weeks, burned into the hafts of the training spears, in the Thornwood yard, carved into the lintel of the holdfast door. It was a warden's mark, one of her own. She sat with it a long time, turning it in the gray light while the cart jolted north, making herself be certain before she let the thought all the way in. There was no honest way for a Dunreach assassin to be carrying a blade marked with the running stag of the Thornwood. A trophy, she tried, a thing looted, a thing traded. But a careful man did not cut his private owner's mark into a weapon. He'd only just stolen, and the scoring was old, worn soft at the edges by a thumb that had carried it for years. This was no trophy. This was a man's own knife, a Thornwood knife, that had ended up in a Dunreach hand and been thrown at the throat of the king on the one night Isora had slipped into the capital unseen. The blade that had been thrown at Aldrich tonight had come out of her father's house. And someone in the Thornwood, someone who had eaten at that long table, someone who had pressed a fist to their heart when she walked into the misted yard, someone who had been close enough to her plan to know the night and the road and the disguise, had put it in the enemy's hand. The leak was not at court, the leak was home, and the only people who had known she was riding south were the ones she had let herself, for the first time in 11 years, begin to trust. She told no one what she'd found. The first lesson of a traitor in the house is a simple one. You do not warn the walls that you have heard the rat behind them. So Isara came back into the Thornwood, smiling the tired smile of a woman who had done a hard thing well, and she let them fuss over the ledgers. And she watched. She was very good at watching. She had 4 months and more behind her eyes now. Mela had let out the seams of 2 warden coats without a word, and the loose wool hid what the coat could no longer quite hide, and only the 2 of them knew that the huntress moving through the holdfast carried the whole future of a kingdom under her ribs. It made her patient. It made her deadly. A woman guarding 2 hearts that are not yet strong enough to guard themselves learns a stillness that nothing rushes. "You've gone quiet, even for you," Mela said one evening, pressing a warm poultice of comfrey and old wool to the ache that had settled into Isora's back as the weight of the twins grew. The healer missed nothing. "Quiet like a cat on a wall. What have you seen that the rest of us haven't?" "Nothing yet," Isora said, which was true, and everything, which was truer. She turned her head to watch the yard through the shutter gap, where the folk of the wood went about the evening, in the firelight, any one of whom might have marked a stag into a killer's blade. Mela. If someone in this wood were false, someone who'd sat at that table and taken the token from that old woman's hand, how would I find them? The healer's hands went still on her back. You wouldn't, easily. A man who's kept a lie 20 years has grown into it like bark. You'd not find the rot by looking at the tree. She resumed her slow work. You'd find it by watching which branch the crows won't land on. Watch who's never afraid, child. In a wood full of frightened people. Fears, honest. It's the calm ones you count. Isora filed that away with everything else, and said nothing of the blade, and did not let herself finish the thought about who in the thornwood was never ever afraid. She looked for the wrongness the way she'd look for a snare wire strung across a trail, not by staring, but by letting her eye go soft until the one thing that didn't belong caught the light. She near fixed on the wrong branch twice. There was a nervous young man named Eder who flinched whenever the ledgers were mentioned, and for 2 days she was half sure of him until she followed him to his shame and found it was only a girl in the next holdfast and a promise to her father he'd not kept. There was a woman who slipped out at odd hours and turned out to be nursing a sick ewe. She was too proud to admit she loved. The wood was full of small secrets, and none of them were the one Isora hunted, and the hunting itself began, piece by piece, over a handful of days, to point somewhere she did not want it to go. It began with the ledgers themselves. She had them fully now, and Torin sat with her each night to read them, and it was Torin who first turned the lamp of her attention where he wanted it. Look here, he said, tracing a column of done-reach transfers with one blunt finger. And here. The coin doesn't just leave the treasury, girl. Someone of the chain approves each draw. There's a seal. He let her find it herself, which was cleverer than telling her. Whose seal is that? Isora looked, and the floor of her stomach dropped, because she knew that seal the way she knew her own hand. The running wolf of the royal house, the king's own privy mark, the one only Aldrich himself could set. That's not. She started. I know, Torin said gently. I didn't want to be the one to show you. He did not push. He never pushed. That was the genius of him. She would think later. He simply laid the next stone in the path and let her walk to it herself. Corwin's last letters, recovered by a friend in the south, each one begging the king directly for the men and coin that never came, and each one, Torin noted quietly, marked, received and read in the royal secretariat, and answered with nothing. A muster order, sending Corwin to hold the Redmore line with half the numbers the field required, sealed with that same running wolf. And at last, near the bottom of it, in a hand she had watched write her name 1,000 times. The thing that stopped her heart entirely, a private note, unsigned but unmistakable, to a done-reach factor, promising that the northern claim is contained and will trouble no one. The northern claim, the last vein. Her. She sat back from the table very slowly. The lamp guttered. Somewhere out in the dark, a child of the wood laughed, and it sounded very far away. No, she said. But it came out thin, and Torin heard the thinness in it, and his weathered face filled with a sorrow so exactly measured that a less broken woman might have wondered at how ready it was. I'm sorry, girl, he said. I hoped the ledgers would clear him. I did. But you asked me once why he never warned you. He closed the book, gentle as a man closing a coffin. This is why. You were never his queen that he stole away. You were his loose thread. And a man doesn't warn a thread. He snips it when it's served. She did not sleep that night, or the next. She walked the trap lines in the dark until her legs shook. One hand pressed always to the low curve of herself as though she could keep the two of them from hearing what their mother now believed about their father. Because she did believe it. The horror of it was how perfectly it fit. It fit the shape of the oldest wound she had, the one that had been in her long before Aldrich. The fosterling's certainty, learned young, and never fully unlearned, that she was a useful thing and not a loved one, that the sword was wanted, and never the woman who carried it. For 11 years Aldrich had made her feel she'd been wrong about herself. And now here was the proof, in his own hand, that she'd been right all along, that the 11 years were the lie, and the wound was the truth. The northern claim is contained. I have kept it close, for precisely this purpose. She thought of the bond in the scriptorium, the terror and the wanting pouring off him with no guile in it. And she hated the memory now, because what use was a bond? A bond told you a man's body wanted you. It said nothing at all about what his mind meant to do with you. Once the wanting was spent, Verena had a bond of a kind too, she supposed. Look what it had bought the general. On the second night, Mela found her out among the black trees, and stood with her a while without speaking, the way the healer did, letting the woods say what needed saying. "You're grieving him again," Mela observed at last. "Worse than the first time you thought he'd stopped loving you. Now you think he never did." She was quiet a moment. "Be careful, child. Grief, that big, is a door, and there's always someone standing ready to walk you through it, to a room of their choosing. When a thing wounds you exactly where you were already sore, exactly, mind, as though it were made to fit, that's the time to ask who cut it to your measure. The proof is in his own hand," Isora said dully. "And you'd know his hand better than any forger in the north, wouldn't you?" Mela said. "Which is exactly why his hand is what they'd trouble to forge." She touched Isora's cheek once, rough and gentle, and went back inside, and left the words to do their slow work in the dark. But the wound was too fresh and too deep, and Isora was too far gone into it, and for once in her life she did not listen to the wisest woman she knew. By the third dawn, she had gone somewhere cold and level, past grief, into the flat country a hunter goes to when there is only the kill left to make. She found Torin at the palisade. "Tell me how to end him," she said. Something moved behind his eyes that she was too gutted to read. "Not end," he said. "Unmask. A king who dies a martyr only makes his lie immortal. But a king unmade before the whole realm, named a traitor to his own people by the last true warden of the north, the very claim he thought he'd buried." He turned to face her fully. "The Dun Reach has called a council. Envoys, the great houses, the packs, all gathered under truce in a fortnight, to bless the new alliance and the coming heir. Every power in the realm in one hall. You will stand up in that hall, Isaravane, and you will tell them what the king's own ledgers prove. And then," he said, and his voice dropped, careful and warm and terrible, "you will show them what he did to the woman he discarded. You will show them the heirs he got in secret and cast into the dark to die. Let the whole realm see the kind of man their king truly is." And there it was. She had not told him. She had told no one but Mela. She had let out her own coats and worn loose wool and moved with a hunter's stillness precisely so that not one soul in this wood beyond the healer would ever know what she carried. And Torin had just spoken of the airs under her ribs as plainly as if he'd counted the heartbeats himself. Isara's face did not change. 11 years at a court where a flicker could kill her had taught her that much. Whatever went white and roaring behind her eyes, her face stayed a still pond. Yes, she heard herself say, from very far away. The whole realm should see, but under the flat pond of her face, the hunter had come fully awake at last. All the grief burned off in an instant, like frost under a torch, and she was thinking very clearly and very coldly. She had let out her own coats. She had worn loose wool and moved with a stillness. Nothing rushed, precisely so that no soul in this wood beyond one healer would ever mark what she carried. Mela would cut out her own tongue before she breathed it. She had never told the king. She had never told Nima. She had barely, in the dark, let herself tell her own reflection. So how does a dead warden's man speak of the airs beneath her ribs, as plainly as if he had knelt in the frost outside a birthing room and counted the heartbeats himself? There was only one way. And the same instant she saw it, she saw the rest of it come with it, cold and total, the way the whole shape of a snare shows itself the moment you finally spot the wire. That the man who knew her deepest secret was the man who had appeared in a ditch to save her. That the proof in Aldrich's hand had come to her table through Torrhen's friend in the south, and no one else's. That Mela had said, "Watch, who's never afraid." And that in a wood full of frightened people, Torrhen had never once, not for a single breath, been afraid. She did not let one flicker of it reach her face. She had loved a man for 11 years without the court ever guessing. She could hate one for a fortnight the same way. "The whole realm should see," she said again, and smiled at the traitor who had shaped her grief into a blade and aimed it at the wrong heart, and began, behind her still-pond eyes, to plan how she would bury him with it. She had a fortnight, and she spent it the way her father would have. Not raging at the snare, but tracing the wire back to the hand that set it. Once she was looking for the truth instead of the wound. It came apart in her hands almost too easily, and she was ashamed of how completely the grief had blinded her. The forged note to the Dunreach factor, "The northern claim is contained," was dated to the Feast of the Long Watch. 3 winters passed. Isara remembered that night, the way she remembered her own name, because it was the night Aldrich had first told her he loved her, on the cold rampart above the east gate, and he had not left her side from dusk till the dawn bells. He could not have sealed a letter to a foreign factor that night. He had been holding her hands and shaking, with his own daring, the whole night through. The letter was a lie, and a lie needed a liar, and only a handful of men had touched those ledgers before they reached her table. She stopped sleeping in the holdfast, and started following Torrhen instead. On the 9th night he led her, without knowing it, to a charcoal burner's hut 2 leagues east, and she lay in the frost outside a gap in the daub and listened to Torrhen speak the salt and iron cant of the Dunreach to a man in a grey southern cloak as fluently as any born son of the border. She listened to him take a purse. She listened to him say her own name, and the word for whelp, and laugh. And she listened to the grey man ask whether the huntress suspected anything, and to Torrhen answer, "Easy and fond, that one? She's so hungry to be loved that she'll believe her own heart is the villain if you tell her sweetly enough. I raised her rage myself, brick by brick. She'll gut her king on the council floor, and thank me for the knife." Isara lay in the frost with both hands cupped over her children, and did not move a muscle, though every wolf in her howled too. She had heard what she came to hear. Torrhen was not her father's man who had turned. He was the Dunreach's man who had never been anything else. The deep hand in the north, set years ago to find the loose vein thread and keep it, and when the thread turned out to be carrying the king's own blood, to sharpen it into the one blade that could open Ashfell from the inside. Verena had married the crown from within. Torrhen would break it from without, and Isora, the grieving, motherless, hungry to-be-loved warden's daughter, was to be the hand that held the knife and took the blame. She could have killed him in the frost. Her hand was on her father's knife, and the range was nothing, and every wolf in her was screaming for it. It would have been easy, and it would have been the last mistake she ever made, because a dead traitor in a wood proves nothing to a council of doubting lords, and a grieving huntress found standing over his body would prove only the thing Torrhen had spent a fortnight building her to seem: mad, dangerous, a danger best handled quietly. No, she had a kingdom to save now, and 2 lives to see safely born into it, and neither of those was worth trading for the brief sweetness of a throat cut in the dark. Her father had taught her that too, without ever saying it. The hunter who kills for the wanting instead of the need goes home hungry. So she crept back from the frost, with the whole plot laid bare in her chest, and she went home, and she smiled, and she let Torrhen believe he had made her. She used the fortnight well. She let him coach her in what to say on the council floor, and she memorized every word, because she meant to speak most of them, only turned. She had the true ledgers copied fair by Mela's steady hand and sewn into the lining of her warden coat, where Torrin would never think to look, alongside the Dunreach owner's blade and a wax pressing she'd taken, one careful midnight, of the forger's die itself from the false letters. Damning proof that the royal seal on Aldrich's confession had never touched the true die at all. She sent one quiet word south to a friend of the king's she'd once trusted, and never learned whether it arrived. And she slept, when she slept, with both hands over her children and her father's knife under the straw. And she waited for the council day, the way she'd once waited in a blind, for the biggest stag of the season, without hurry, without mercy, and without the smallest intention of missing. And in the grey dawn of the council day, she let him dress her rage in warden green and lead her into the great truce hall of the capital, into a sea of the realm's whole power. The packs, the great houses, the Dunreach envoys in their salt iron grey, Verena on the dais in silver, with one hand resting meaningfully on the swell she had padded beneath her gown, and Aldrich beside his false queen, hollow-eyed, not knowing his loose thread had come to hang him. Torrin's plan was simple. Isora would rise, denounce the king with his own sealed ledgers, and then reveal the heirs beneath her coat, as the final proof of his monstrous cruelty, the discarded warden, and the secret children he'd meant to leave to die. Every eye in the realm would turn on Aldrich as a monster, his legitimacy would collapse, the Dunreach alliance would rush in to steady the ruin, and the North would rise behind its wronged warden. It was a good plan. It was, in fact, nearly the plan Isora carried out. She rose when the herald called the warden of the Thornwood, and the whole hall gasped to see the king's cast-off huntress alive and standing and heavy with child. And Aldrich came half out of his seat with her name breaking on his lips, and Verena's hand tightened on her false belly, folded his arms, and smiled the smile of a man watching his own machine begin to turn. "I came here," Isara said, and her clear hunter's voice carried to every stone, "to accuse the man who murdered General Corwin, sold this realm to the Dunreach, and used a grieving widow and a warden's daughter both as his instruments." She let it land. She watched 100 faces turn, at last toward the dais, toward the king. Then she turned, in the ringing silence, and pointed, not at Aldrich, but at the back of the hall, at the graying man in the plain coat who had pulled her from a ditch and taught her to hate. "His name is Torrin," she said, "and it never once was mine." The hall came apart, like a struck hive. She gave it no room to doubt her. She had learned from watching Torrin that a room believes whoever hands it proof fastest, so she handed it proof, the real ledgers, the untampered ones, tracing every stolen coin south into Dunreach hands with never a royal seal upon them, the king's privy mark she named for the forgery it was, and challenged the assembled secretaries to test the wax against the true die, which no forger in the North had ever held. She named the charcoal burner's hut and the grey factor and the salt iron cant, and when the Dunreach envoys surged up in outrage she asked them, pleasantly, why their own man was standing at the back of a truce hall he had no leave to enter. And she turned to Verena, pale, now on her silver dais, and said, "The realm has waited 3 days of bells for your heir, your grace. I am sure a healer's hands will be glad to confirm the blessing you carry here, before the council, as I will gladly confirm mine." Verena did not let them lay a hand on her. She came up off the silver dais with her painted grief, finally, fatally gone, and in its place was the thing Isora had known was there since a smile across a candlelit hall, 6 months past, cold and quick and cornered. "You would take the word of a jilted huntress," she said to the council, her voice climbing. "A warden's stray grubbed out of a ditch over your anointed queen." But the great houses had heard the word, Dunreach now, and had seen a queen refuse a healer's hand before the whole realm. And there is no fear in the world quite like a room of powerful men who suddenly suspect they have been made fools of. The muttering rose to a roar. The truce hall, built to bless an alliance, had become in the space of 100 heartbeats, the trap that sprang on the ones who'd built it. That, in the end, was all the proof the hall required. But it was Aldrich that Isora had saved for last, and it was Aldrich she turned to now, and for the first time since the candlelit hall, she let herself look at him full in the face, before the whole watching world. "You cast me off before this same court a season past," she said, and her voice did not shake, "and you would not meet my eyes, and I have hated you every hour since, for the coward I thought that made you." The hall was utterly silent. "I know now what you were doing. I know you saw the knife she'd made of me and threw yourself between it and the realm. The only way you could, and told no one. And let me believe the worst of you, because you thought the worst of you was the only thing that would keep me alive and keep her blind." She drew a breath. "You were right that it kept me alive. You were a fool to think I needed protecting instead of trusting. And you were the greatest fool of all, Aldrich, in what you never once thought to ask." She unfastened the warden coat and let the loose wool fall open and set both hands beneath the round and undeniable truth of herself, and every alpha in that hall, who had breath enough left to scent the air, went utterly still, because there is no forging a true bond and no faking the blood of a king. And the whole council felt at once what the king's own nose told him in the same instant, that the children the warden of the Thornwood carried were his. She watched it hit him. She had wondered in the cold weeks what his face would do, and now she knew, and it was worse and better than she'd imagined. The blood left him all at once. His mouth shaped her name with no sound behind it. He gripped the arm of his chair like a man on the deck of a foundering ship, and his eyes went from her face to her hands and back again, doing the arithmetic she had done alone on a cold stair 6 months past, the night in the hall, the season since, the loose wool. The doubled warmth his own wolf had snagged on in a dark colonnade and been unable to name. She saw him name it now. She saw him understand that the thing his instinct had reached for, and lost, was his own blood. That on the night he had thrown her to the wolves to save her life, she had already been carrying 2 more. That she had walked away from his ruin of a wedding and gone alone into the dark and the frost and the danger with his children under her heart and had told him nothing, because he had given her nothing left to trust. The grief and the joy and the ruin of it broke over him in a single wave, and the bond, wide open, carried every part of it straight into her chest, so that she stood there in her moment of total victory and felt his heart break in real time, as clearly as if it were her own, which, God's help her, some traitor thread of it still half was. The secret he never saw coming. She had carried it half a year through the dark for precisely this, that he would learn of it here, in the light, before the whole world, on her terms, and not his. She had promised herself the moment would taste like triumph. It tasted like nothing at all. It tasted of the 2 of them on a rampart a lifetime ago, and everything that might have been set alight and held up for a hall of strangers to warm their hands at. Torrin ran, of course. Cornered men always did, and he came the only direction left to him, which was straight at her. Because a dead warden tells no counsel anything. The knife was out of his sleeve and half a beat from her unguarded side, when the whole hall cried out. But Isora Vane had been guarding 2 lives that could not guard themselves for 6 months now, and she had been waiting for exactly this her whole life, without knowing it. She turned inside the knife the way her father had taught her to turn downhill, caught the wrist, used the traitor's own weight and rage against him, and put him face down on the Truce Hall stone with her knee in his spine and his own blade skittering away across the floor. She leaned close to his ear, in the sudden roaring quiet, and said the only thing she had carried all this way to say to him. "You raised my rage, brick by brick," she murmured. "You should have remembered who taught me to lay stone. My father, not you." Then the guards had him, and it was done. Afterward, the envoys disgraced and detained, Verena taken shrieking from her dais, the great houses roaring their fury at a foreign plot, laid bare, the hall emptied in tight, urgent knots, until somehow, in the way such things happen, there was a small still island in the wreck of it that held only the two of them. Aldrich had come down off the dais. He stopped a careful distance from her, the way you stop near something that might bolt. And she understood the whole cost of the last season was in his face. "You saved my life," he said hoarsely. "My crown, my realm, after what I did to you. After what I let you believe." His eyes dropped again, helpless, to her hands, to his children, and his voice went to pieces. "You carried them alone, in the dark, because you did not trust me to be worth the telling." He pressed the heel of his hand hard to his mouth. "And you were right not to. Gods forgive me. You were right. I came to unmask a traitor and save the realm," Isora said, and made her voice flat as the truce hall stone. "That is all. Not 1 hour of it was forgiveness." "I know," he said, so quietly it barely reached her. "I never dreamed it might be. A man doesn't earn back in an afternoon what he's spent over a season." His throat worked. "But I have to say the rest of it once, and then I'll never press it on you again unless you ask. On the rampart, I meant every word, Isara, and I have never in 11 years lied to you. Not once, which is the whole tragedy of it, because the one time I let you believe a lie, it was the biggest one a man could tell, and I told it in front of the entire world so that it would take. I thought a clever king could hold you safe at arm's length and explain it all after, and you'd understand." He gave a small, wrecked laugh. "I never once thought to simply trust you with the danger and let you choose your own risk, the way you've chosen it every day since, without me. You'd have seen through Verena in a week. You saw through her the moment I let you look. I broke both our hearts to protect a woman who never needed my protection, only my honesty, and I couldn't give her the one thing because I was too much a coward to risk the other." It was a good answer. It was always a good answer with Aldrich. That was the whole unbearable trouble of him, and this one had the added cruelty of being true. "You should have told me," she said, and hated that her voice had thinned. "Yes," he said simply. "That is the whole of my crime, and I'll not spend a breath pretending it's smaller than it is." And then he lowered himself, there in the emptying hall, before the cast-off huntress and the whole idea of his own untouchable crown. The king of Ashfell went down on one knee on the cold council stone, in his ruined finery, before lords still filing out who would carry the sight of it to every hearth in the realm. And he did not reach for her. "So I'll earn it," he said. "However long it takes. I have nothing left worth having that I would not spend on it, gladly, to the last coin. Only tell me one thing, and I swear I'll not ask you for another." He looked up, and his eyes were wet and unashamed. "May I know them? Whatever else I forfeited, whatever you decide for you and me, and you have every right in the world to decide against me. May I be allowed to know my children?" And Isora, who had rehearsed 100 cold answers on 100 cold trap lines, who had walked away from this man once in a hall of 1,000 candles without letting her spine bend by so much as a hair, found that she had none of them left. She did not answer him that day. She made him wait, and she was not sorry, because she had waited too, in the huntsman's wing and the culvert and the frost outside a charcoal burner's hut. And a woman learns things in the waiting that cannot be unlearned by a single kneeling. He did earn it, though, which was the part she had not let herself expect. The king, who had never once had to raise his voice to be obeyed, spent the turning of the season learning to ask instead of her people, of the wood that had every reason to spit at his shadow. He did not send flowers. He sent, first, the writ that restored the wardenship his father had broken 20 years past. Halden Vane's name cleared before the whole realm. His lands returned, the attainder struck from the rolls. The scattered folk of the Thornwood made whole and free upon their own ground for the first time in a generation. And then he came north himself to read it aloud in the misted yard, alone, with 6 guards left at the tree line. Because, he said, a man asking pardon should not come armored. He stood before the folk his house had hunted through these very trees, and he named his father's crime a crime, plainly, with no softening word laid over it, and he held the crown out in his 2 hands, like a man offering up a weapon to those he'd wronged, and told them it was theirs to refuse him if they chose. Isora watched the old woman who had kept the running stag token all those years walk up to the king of Asheville and study his face a long hard moment, and then press her fist to her heart for a king this time, and Isora had to turn and go out under the black trees again for the same reason as the first day and its exact opposite. He came back after that. Not as a king progressing, with heralds and a train, but quietly, on the first free morning he could steal each week, to sit at the long common table and be handed chores by children who did not care what a crown was, and to let Torrens ruin and Verena's fall. He was patient in a way she had never known him to be. The man who had once wanted everything settled and certain in a night now seemed content to let a single afternoon be enough, and to ride home, not knowing whether he'd be welcome the next. That more than the writ, more than the kneeling, was what began at last to thaw the frost in her. Not that he asked, that he had learned finally how to wait for the answer. He was there when the twins came, though she had sworn he would not be, a hard gray dawn, Mela's steady hands, and Isora's own cry, bringing him through the door against every order she'd given, to stand white and useless and utterly undone in the corner, while 2 small furious voices announced themselves to the world. A boy and a girl. When Mela laid them in the crook of each arm, Isara looked up and found the king of all the land weeping without shame or dignity in the corner of a warden's birthing room, and she understood that whatever he had been to the court, whatever mask the crown had made him wear, this at least was the true face beneath it. The one she'd told him on a colonnade once that she liked a great deal. "You said I never thought to ask the one thing," he said much later, when the wood was quiet and the fire low, and she had let him hold his daughter for the first time. "In the hall, you said I was the greatest fool in what I never asked." He did not look up from the small sleeping face. "I've turned it over every night since. And I think the thing I never asked was simply whether you would have me, not the huntress, not the warden, not the claim, you." I spent 11 years so certain of the answer that I never once said the question aloud, and then I lost the right to. He looked up at her at last. "So I'll say it now, with no crown in it and no court to hear, and you may throw it back in my teeth, and I'll deserve it. Isora, will you have me?" The fire popped. Outside the wood breathed, and Isora looked at the man kneeling. Again, always kneeling now. This man who had once passed her by in a hall of 1,000 candles, and would spend the rest of his days making certain she was the only fixed point in every room he entered, and she thought of the girl in the green dress who had known exactly how that night would end. "Ask me again tomorrow," she said. But she was smiling when she said it, and the bond wide open between them, and no longer strangled at all, gave her away before she'd finished, and he laughed, that real one, surprised out of him, and she found she did not mind being given away in the least. He asked her again, the next day, and the next. It became, in the restored Thornwood, a thing the whole wood counted on, the king of Asheville riding north, each free morning to kneel in the yard and ask the warden a question she never quite answered, while 2 small silver-eyed terrors rode him like a hill, and the old folk pretended not to grin. He asked badly and beautifully, and once with the entire council waiting 3 days on his pleasure, while he refused to leave until she'd fed him. And one perfectly ordinary morning, with no ceremony and no 1,000 candles, and no court to see, she looked at the man, grinning up at her with a child on each shoulder, and she said yes. They wed in the misted yard, under her father's cleared name, warden and king as equals, which was the only way she would ever have had it, and the only way, he swore, he had ever truly wanted it. He cried during the vows. She'd known he would, and when it was done, he pressed his brow to hers the way he had on a rampart a lifetime ago and murmured, "No more shadows." No, taking it back this time, and she laughed, and told him she was the one who'd walked away first if he recalled. and so the taking back had never been his to give.